even have a microphone. Yeah, awesome. Right, are you ready?
I think I'm ready.
Do you know the rules?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? That's impossible.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yay.
All right. The mic is not on.
It says it's on.
I knew it. Like, Runa's demo
light's
went
good.
too well. Yeah. Yeah, I'll give it to you in a minute.
Oh, sorry.
I'll take your microphone. This is it has no name on it. Yeah. Anyways, the first thing you have to do is to remind the audience about the rules. Do you know the rules?
I know the rules.
Right. Great. Then I will hand you my microphone.
Okay.
Okay. Good luck.
Now you can hear me. We did it!
Okay. Big applause to the.
Yay!
Yeah. Awesome. Okay. I'll get out of your hair.
Thanks,
With
Knut.
leg.
I hope I don't. But I think we should give Knut a round of applause for being such a great MC the last couple of days. Yeah, thanks. So as Knut alluded to, I am Suk. I oversee our agency partnerships here. I'm super excited to be part of the team. Just rounded up my second month. So hopefully I'll get through my probation and still be here. Bad joke. But yeah, we're at the home stretch, so hoping to elevate the energy a little bit. We have a great panel that we're going to bring up of some experts in the space. I was thinking about how to open for this improv, and I was thinking we missed a great marketing opportunity. We should have called this the unstructured content. I'm a dad. Give me a break. But yeah, that's kind of, so we over the last 2 days, as Knut mentioned at the beginning of the conference, we asked everyone to send their questions in, whether in person or in London or in Oslo or online. And we have a special box here of curated questions that we've gotten in. And we're just going to pull them out randomly and go through our panel and hopefully have a really good discussion covering all the questions that we have. So the only rule, I think, other than that is you cannot say it depends. You cannot start your answer with, well, it depends. I think other than that, we're going to be okay. So enough about me and opening remarks. So let's welcome our panel to the stage. I'll start with Josiah McCann, who's the Director of Technology at HC Agency. Colleen, will welcome you back to the stage, President of Content Science and presenter a few hours ago. I don't want to embarrass you, Andy, but Dr. Andy Fitzgerald, information architecture and content strategy consultant. We have Jess Sand, another consultant, digital experience strategist. And we have, last but not least, Val Swisher, founder and CEO of Content Rules. Join us. How's everyone feeling almost at 4 o'clock on a Wednesday hump day?
Caffeinated.
Excellent, yes.
Fantastic.
Great. Should we just hop right into it, or did we want to preface by saying anything about the conference?
Well, it depends. No.
That was rehearsed. Let's just go right into it then. All right. We plan to do a round robin. Let's see if it works out. All right, first question. What are some minimal viable strategies or plans for implementing structured content in an organization that has limited technical resources? Jess.
All right. I think that's a great question. I think it's a very realistic question because I feel like I run into this all the time. I work with a lot of nonprofits, and so that is always an issue. I kind of always start with people in that situation. So if you don't have the technology, you have to start with people, and you have to start with process and looking at how you're actually using content now and producing content now. And from there, I would say sort of working with folks to break down workflows, understanding the why behind the way they produce content the way they do, and then start looking at how can you create workflows, work sort of structure into the workflow if you don't have the technology to sort of create that structure. Because I think a lot of times we're using technology to create the structure for the workflow. And I think if you start the other direction, you end up with a much more people-first approach.
Any color?
Anybody counter?
Everybody has spreadsheets.
Yep.
They start in a spreadsheet, they start in a recommendation, and you don't have the tools to provide the guardrails,
Yeah.
but there's the tools are enforcing, or not enforcing, they're facilitating a process, and the process, it's harder to make stick without the guardrails, but the process can be started, and if there are some small wins there, then sometimes that might be the motivation to say, well, if we can put some of those guardrails up, that might be worth a little bit of funding. Nonprofits always have some funding.
They can always find funding. They know where to look.
You know, I think we kind of like to jump into modeling content as a step one. I think step 0 often is, what are we trying to do? And that's where the human thing comes into play here. It's like, it's a high level requirements gathering of, okay, so we want an MVP. We want to do an MVP. We have no people, but we want to show the value of what we're doing with structured content. So how can we do that? And the best is to talk to other people and understand, gather that understanding before we start. I know, I'm going to start writing code. I'm going to start modeling things out, right? And then on the other side of that, when we're talking about resource scarcity in proving out a point, that's a great thing about using, for developers or engineers that have that are a little bit more on the front end. Something like Sanity, for instance. One of the great things about Sanity is if you know JavaScript, you can do all these things. You can do that content modeling. You can work there. You can work on maybe the MVP of the actual front end and the MVP of doing the content modeling. I mean, it's JavaScript, and so I think it's a requirements gathering, and then maybe using developer resources more strategically.
And just to piggyback off what you said, Andy, who's responsible for setting those guardrails? Is it stakeholders on the technical side of the organization? Is it the content creation team? Or is it collaborative?
I think it has to be collaborative.
Yeah.
And the person who implements the code or who makes the recommendation, that might be a person, but they never operate in a vacuum. It's if I'm doing that for an organization, I don't know anything about what those guardrails should be when I start, but it's by asking the right questions to the organization and by channeling their needs and their resources and the outcomes that they're seeking, that I can use that knowledge to then help them build those guardrails internally.
Would you echo that was the experience at the home improvement client of yours, Colleen? Was there alignment from the beginning from all different stakeholders?
No.
Or is that something you come in and you create that buy-in? That's part of the consultation.
Yeah,
that you
so
provide.
that situation was interesting because there weren't guardrails and the content went out anyway and it had been out there for a while. So being able to get data together and take a look at, okay, so this is what you've done. Let's look at how effective it is. And that was tremendously helpful in starting to establish some guardrails, start some conversations with the different stakeholders involved. Obviously, not everyone is at that starting point. If you don't have any content out there yet, obviously that wouldn't be a good minimum strategy. But a lot of times with bigger organizations, nonprofit or not, something's out there. We've managed to create a lot of content and put it out in the digital universe. And so taking a beat to see how effective it is can support a lot of really positive conversations, including that one.
Awesome.
Can I add one other word?
Yeah, of course.
Skunkworks. I mean,
Skunkworks?
it was said earlier, but ask for forgiveness, not permission. So if you can't get technology resources or budget, start small and hacky and do it on the side. If you can squeeze it into your lunch break, or if you can squeeze it in between meetings. I got together with the product manager at GoPro back when I was in-house, and we sort of built out a custom proof of concept CMS type thing to control, really a headless CMS that was super hacky, totally didn't work well, but it was a proof of concept to get people, to help people recognize what we could potentially do with real resources.
Start to build the business case internally.
Exactly.
Yeah.
What I would add, agree with everybody, but what I would add is two things. One is you don't need anything to structure your content. You can structure your content in the tools you're using today. You just have to look at your content in a different way. Look at your content in that way of building blocks. And the second thing I would add is standardizing your content, making sure that your terminology is consistent, your grammar is accurate, correct, consistent, your style is consistent. Because once you get into a structured environment, particularly if you're going to reuse content, you're going to be building things from small pieces, in order for them to fit together and make sense to your reader, they all have to be standardized and have the same terminology and using those words in the same ways. So.
It is alarming how even in a small organization, so many people can be using the same word to mean different things.
Absolutely.
And until they have the conversation about what those words mean, they never know it.
All the time.
Very good
The
point.
customer does.
The
They
customer,
get real
the customer knows
confused
something's
real
wrong.
fast.
Yes.
I love it. Everyone responded. So let's pivot to the next question here out of this special curated box of questions we have here. Can content be too structured?
Can content be too structured? That's a really good question. Yes, content can be too structured. It's too structured when you can no longer manage it. So finding that sweet spot of just right sizing your different pieces of content can be difficult. I think data would help, right? It can be difficult, but yeah, you know, you need to make sure that it's manageable. And I have had customers that have structured their content so much and made the level of granularity so narrow that managing all of that content became a nightmare. So.
A real world, a dev-focused example of that is, I think, in the early stages of like the Jamstack, there, you know, some practices and things really kind of like, oh man, structured content's it. You don't need a page builder. Clients don't need to be able to, you know, add. Everything will be structured content. Everything, we just will build everything so organized and structured, and everyone's going to be happy. And this goes back to other talks and about this balance between, you know what, there's a medium between how much you structure and how much you don't. And I think that's a real world example of where you know, a lot of us were in like headless content management, building a little bit over structured, and like understanding, well, where are the pieces that as we saw in the last talk, we can understand hierarchy, layer, taxonomy, and that just makes the business run, not just making a website, that makes the business run. And where do we need to give like our marketing clients the ability to generate marketing pages with front-end components?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of goes back to what I think Samira was saying about the struggle with like the over-structured authoring experience or componentized authoring experience that makes it onerous on content creators, and then you get that, you know, that downward spiral where people stop wanting to create content or they get frustrated with the content, and then again they lose trust in the system. And so I think you know, it kind of always comes back to the people, and it's easy in a headless CMS environment to, you kind of lose that connection to the actual, not just the end user, but the interim user, the author, and making sure that they're involved in the process when you're structuring your content so that you understand, you know, just where those edges are.
Awesome. Let's continue. I'll go to the bottom here. Maybe there's something.
Right.
Dig deep.
How do you involve content strategists in your design and discovery process?
Early and often.
Here, here.
Yeah, I think content strategists can add a lot to that whole process, and it's really exciting that this conference is bringing together, you know, the engineering side and the strategy side to, you know, really join brain powers and thinking through, okay, what's really going to be valuable to the business, what's going to accomplish business goals, what's going to be, you know, feasible to build, what's going to have a big impact on the customer experience, and having, you know, the engineering lens on content along with the strategic lens, just a really powerful combination. So, yeah, I think involving content strategists in a digital transformation of any kind is critical.
Who's you know, to piggyback off that, who's usually the sponsor you find with your clients inside the account or the customer that spearheads an initiative around structured content or headless content? What does that usually look like?
I often think that the strategists come in and say, this is what we want to do, and then engineering comes in and says, yes, but this is what we can do. And so you need to work together.
Sure.
Right? So you need, you know, give me the world. Okay, well, I'll give you, you know, not the whole world, just half the world. So working together to get that balance between what the ideal is, what the strategy, you know, really should be, and what the technology can do is super important before you start doing anything.
The other thing about that I think is beautiful is that when you bring engineers and content strategists together, and engineers understand their connection to and role in the strategy, it unlocks so many opportunities and possibilities, and they get creative, and then all of a sudden you have this sort of avalanche of ideas that come up and solutions that you would not have come up with if either were working in a silo.
That's such a good point, because the engineers could come in and say, oh, but did you know we could also do this, 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 and this?
Yeah.
So I think, yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah.
And the content strategist will tend to balance that with, that's great, and our users need this. They need to, the business needs to accomplish this.
Or how do we handle this in this instance, in this other area of the system that the engineer may be not focusing on, because we've got this bigger picture view of the whole, you know, all the moving parts.
Yeah.
Great stuff. All right. What's next in here? What does related content even mean?
Could you say that again? What does what even mean?
What does related content
Related content.
even
Related content.
Question. Phenomenal question.
Can we say it depends at this point?
It means different things to different people, that's
Yeah,
for sure.
it goes back to talking about being aligned on the jargon you're using when you're speaking with people, right?
And understanding the domain.
Yeah.
Something will be, I like to use the example of a veterinary clinic and a pet store. They have overlapping domains that have many of the same concepts and the same ideas in them, but their goals and the way that they structure both the relationships and the content itself will be very different. So two related items in the veterinary domain will likely not be related in the pet store domain, or they'll be related in a very different way. And understanding that domain is the first step in figuring out, is this related, or is it a part-whole relationship that I really want to capture here, or an is-a relationship? And those are hard to do. You can spot individual instances and know intuitively, oh, that's related, that's not really part of like our main thing. But in order to do it systematically, understanding what that whole domain is then unlocks a whole bunch of doors so that you can not only spot the relationships, but then you can make them consistent, because you're thinking about it as a whole instead of looking at it in blinders in very specific instances.
See, it does depend.
It does depend.
But I managed to talk around it.
Well, and I think too that it's really important to understand the mental models we're using when we're describing and documenting those domains, right? Because an organization's understanding and experience of a domain may be very different than their customers or their users, and even within their audience, their larger customer base, there may be just differences and discrepancies. And so, I mean, in my work, so much of my work is around behavior change and social change. It becomes incredibly important to understand how people really operate in the real world and how they think about and what they believe about any given issue or cause or situation. And so being really cued in and listening and like really intentionally collecting and gathering information and talking to your users is just so foundational to being able to describe that domain and then find that happy sort of ground where your organizational understanding actually might shift a little in response to what you're learning from folks, and vice versa, being able to then speak in their language to be able to describe what it is you're trying to describe to them.
I can kind of read this question from here, and I kind of like it, so let's go with it. If structured content is so important, why has it taken 20 years for there to be a discussion about it outside of technical communication circles?
Are there discussions about it outside of technical and communication circles yet?
You're the experts. I'm just the guy asking the questions.
I would say the metaphor of the page. We are addicted to pages. The
Okay.
pull of them is they call to us. We love them because they're nice little units. Everybody's familiar with them.
Yep.
And where does it go? Always. Where does it go on the page? But where's my content? Where does it sit on the page? Is it above the fold? So the idea that your content isn't a page, it's communication. And it happens, as we've seen in so many examples here, in so many different ways in Medium. But that pull of the page, and we see it even in the previews or the cases we've seen where, I forget, somebody gave the example earlier of someone taking Sanity and basically duplicating what they were doing in WordPress on Sanity because that page metaphor is so comfortable. And the idea of units of meaning that form a constellation that you assemble ad hoc given the context of your users is disorienting and terrifying, maybe.
And the same, I think, even though there's an obsession over the page, the component is like the new page, right? And components, they're like little parts of the pages. And so it's more blocky, right? All of a sudden, now that we're using tools and we're building things a little bit differently away from let's blah out code on a page, it's like, oh, okay, so components, they're like building blocks, right? They're like things that you can put together. Well, I wonder, if we organize content now a certain way, how do those building blocks look on top of each other? So it's almost like the tooling has helped begot this understanding of structuring our content now because we're building things differently on the web.
Yeah, structure requires you to think differently when you're writing in structure. And no one ever taught us how to do this. No one ever taught us how to write in components and how to think about content in components that can be mixed and matched in different ways and reused in different places. So when you start to write in a structured environment, it's almost like you have to retrain yourself how to write, or someone has to train you on how to write that way. So it's important, but it's a real paradigm shift of the way you conceptualize how you're going to create your content.
Well, it's been a learning curve for me in my first 2 months at Sanity. I find myself speaking to our agency partners, and I want to tell them we're, the journey from monolith CMS to headless CMS. And I heard Magna say it before, we're the new kids on the block. We're trying to drive the conversation to being a structured content platform and not be pigeonholed into a headless CMS category. So I guess the question from there is, do you hear that term, structured content, in your clients? Are you driving adoption of that term, or is there work to be done there?
So I do talk about it, and I also related to the previous question, I think that there's more interest from marketing than ever before, just because of the demands that they face in moving from a broadcast advertising kind of model to having to be so multi-channel, omni-channel, and marketers are also getting much more tech savvy. There's the marketing technologist role bandied about, and so I think the marketing drive has really opened up the conversation to things like atomic content, structured content, and so I might not always use the term structured, but absolutely bring that up quite a bit, and there's much more receptivity to it than ever before. And it comes up in everything from personalization to optimization, testing different variations of content. If your content isn't structured, then it's a lot harder to test and optimize. And at those kinds of levels, in addition to, hey, you're kind of starting from scratch and need to really think about your whole approach to structuring content.
On the agency side, we absolutely have that explicit conversation
Yep.
about, because we want to define that as part of requirements of what we're building and what kind of data authoring experience that we're trying to build with our clients. I remember a client saying to me, Josiah, in my current content management system, whenever I need to change a staff person's name because I misspelled it, I have to go everywhere on all these different pages to find and replace that staff name. Does what you're building have like a search and replace for all the things? I'm like, so
do you one better.
We're going to solve this problem in a different way. We're going to solve this problem by structuring content. So all of our authors, all of our staff members are structured, and we're using that in different places, and we're changing that in one place, and it changes it everywhere. So yes, absolutely explicitly related to all the requirements and what we're building.
Yeah, my clients are definitely having that conversation, but they're not talking about structure. And what they're talking about is their complete chaos that they live in with the content that they have. And a lot of these organizations are organizing organizations. They work with large networks, a lot of on the ground grassroots organizers that are creating content, sharing content, distributing content, in silos, in local, place-based contexts, and they don't know what to do with it, or how to use it, or how to leverage it, or how to share it, or how to, normalize it across the network so that they can, take advantage of it, and they don't recognize it as a structured content problem, right? They recognize, they see it as an organizing problem. They see it as our people aren't doing what we need them to do in the way we need them to do it. And when you introduce the concept of structured content to them, it can be really scary at first, because it's oh no, we don't want to give people rules, and we don't want to scare people away, and nobody's going to do that work, and it's well, that's there's a process for that, and there's an approach for introducing it, but you start to see light bulbs go off. I mean, I'm working with a client now who's they're so excited by the fact that they now get to work. They democratize the law by basically they work with provide cooperative law references and real estate law references for lay people and help people become lawyers without going to law school and cool stuff like that. They're great, but we've been re-architecting one of their resource sites, and their staff attorneys write these massive, really useful guides in Google Docs that are these 17-chapter, heavily referenced, guides to the law and process, and then they just get copy and pasted into a big, rich text box on the
Into the
web.
abyss.
And, and and as we've been re-architecting and structuring the content, it's like light bulbs going off left and right. They're like, oh my God, this is what we've been waiting for and what we needed and didn't know how to even articulate it. So they're having the conversation, but from a different direction.
And the example, I think, is really important. Some clients I work with, I explain structured content and they get it. And they like it or not, but they understand. And some clients, I still, even a year later, are kind of like, tell me again what that is. I'm just not. And it depends on their context, but being able to show something of this is, because they don't really care about the concept, especially if you're C-level. They care about what it does.
Yeah.
And then it's easier for them to get behind. And they may never need to understand it if they're behind it and supporting it. That's my job.
Yep.
But the example is sometimes critical.
Yeah, and the next question, I'm getting now from them is, okay, great. So when can we introduce this to all of our attorneys and sit down and like retrain them on how to write? And that goes back to, we keep hearing the same kind of core fundamental things over and over, but it is a people game at the end of the day. Producing content it's for people and it's from people, and everything else is just facilitation.
Yeah, and my 5+ years agency side prior to joining Sanity, I think a great learning opportunity for me was, understanding our clients' budgets. Maybe they had $100K to do a IAUX exercise with us or a UX audit. They had $200K to build the site, but they had $1 million to create content, right? And that really started us to start understanding, like, okay, like,
I would love $1
conversation has to
million
change here a little
create
bit,
content.
right? That's where the investment is, so. All right, let's keep going. This one seems personal. I keep resisting the urge to let my designer have features like background image or padding thickness. Should I cave and allow graphic design into the data structure?
No.
See a lot of body language saying no.
Why open that door? It only leads to darkness.
Does it?
It's being able to communicate that, though, that can be sometimes hard, because if
Yeah.
we are not careful, and that's a great thing I like about, I tell clients, I really like Sanity, particularly as a data authoring tool, because I get to say yes so much more often to clients in order to like build the things that they just come up with. And I think the way that we have to say no, like I don't want to communicate in such a way that just like hurts a relationship or like pushes people away. I need the designer to help us solve problems that the engineering side can't, and to have that visualization. And it's like, what is at the heart of that question? Not like, it's not a yes or no. It's like, okay, well, why are you asking? What need is not being met here? Is there a flexibility problem? Is there a, I just want to build and construct something here. I've definitely seen UI things in headless CMSs, turn background off, change different thing, and it's pros and cons, but I think it's asking the why behind it. That's the most important part.
Yeah, it's a signal, that question.
Love it. What do we got next? How do you balance perfect structure? A lot of quotations in these. How do you balance perfect structure and doable by subject matter experts in medical specialties? Am I reading that right?
Subject matter.
Does the question make
I
sense?
feel like I should maybe jump
This
in
is
on
kind
that.
of a lot.
This could be you.
Yeah, maybe. I didn't plant that.
It does say signed by Andy.
Yeah, well, I think perfect structure is a dangerous goal to go for. When I help people build taxonomies, I always encourage us as a team to build a taxonomy for something, not of something.
Sure.
To try and build a perfect taxonomy of even something as small as the flowers that could show up in my garden. I could do that forever. And I'd never be done. And I'd never know when I was done.
Yeah.
And if I really enjoy doing it, I might just keep doing it forever. But if you're trying to meet a business goal, that's never going to meet the business goal. But if you have a business goal, you're building it for something, then you know when it's done. And this is kind of the granularity question as well, is if you know what you're trying to accomplish, not a finished taxonomy or a structure, but the business goal and the user need that's behind it. So that would be that balance. And the part about the subject matter experts, can you repeat that?
And doable by subject matter experts in, I believe it says medical specialties. I think I'm reading that correctly.
Yeah. I'm not sure I understand that bit of the question.
I think it's asking about sort of highly specialized SMEs and how do you give them like just enough structure is what I'm kind of reading into
Maybe
it.
how you make them shut up when you've got what you need.
Or
Perhaps.
involve them in the taxonological process
Yeah.
of that data. Like, how do you involve someone who has that subject matter expert in the creation of a taxonomy or structured data?
Yeah, and you have to.
Yeah.
Because I'm not that expert. I can't figure that out. Sure.
Well, and like to your point, I mean, you're not really ever done, right? I mean, if there is no state of completion, you should be evolving this stuff, and your system should always be evolving, because your customers and your users are always evolving, and if they're not, you're probably not paying attention, right? And so, to me, that all of this stuff is iterative, it's malleable, and that's kind of the point. Right? Like the reason that we're structuring this content is so that we can try new things, do different things, adapt, pivot, change. You know, I mean, and so for me, it's like, you know, when I think about the attorney use case, for example, just because I'm knee deep in it right now, like it's about identifying, understanding their domain, understanding how they talk about their domain and think about their domain and how they structure it in their own mental model, and then thinking about how you're going to either evolve the system towards that or help them evolve towards the system, or ideally both, right?
But the other thing is that there's no such thing as a perfect structure, and there's no such thing as a perfect taxonomy, and just when you think it's perfect, it's going to change, guaranteed, or your company's going out of business.
Yeah.
If you build a structure, build a taxonomy, and it's stagnant,
Yeah.
you're going out of business. So there's no such thing. So it doesn't make sense to me.
There's another shift here, I think. There's a concept in the semantic web world called the open world assumption. And that the answer can be yes, no, or I don't know, from a
depends.
system.
Yeah.
Whereas in the relational database world, if you don't know, the answer is no.
Right.
And I think because we've been living in that world for so long, not only developers, but designers who are beholden to this same set of constraints in the relational database world, getting that a second mind shift of the open world assumption of, we don't know, but we might know that in the future, and being open to that is hard and uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Awesome. What is the best way to start measuring?
Can you say it again? Sorry.
What is the best way to start measuring?
Oh.
Measuring what?
Calling Colleen,
Signed.
obviously. I mean,
Yeah, so assuming that's measuring content. So, you know, most organizations have analytics on some level, so that's a great place to start, of course. And that might sound obvious and basic. However, it's amazing how many organizations we work with who, you know, they've got the tool, they've got Google Analytics or Adobe Analytics, but they're not using it, they're not taking a look at what's there on a regular basis. So, you know, actually making part of the process on a regular basis, whether it's monthly, quarterly, ideally, you know, maybe even more often than that, looking at the data that you have around content and starting to get curious and starting to get people asking questions about what does this mean, getting them paying attention to it. That's a great place to start. And then from there you can kind of refine questions. start to get into, maybe creating a KPI metric matrix, thinking about objectives, goals, what data you have available that might help you get some clues as to whether you're meeting objectives. And, as people start to get involved in that and curious about that, it becomes obvious where you might have data gaps and where you might be able to configure analytics more effectively. We often see where things are not set up well, or there are missed opportunities to set up variables or tags to capture micro engagements with content, to really understand better how particular components are working. And then a lot of times there's missing voice of customer perspective. And I find for content, it's really powerful to tell the story of impact with content, to bring that into play. And so, it often starts with analytics and getting the vanity metrics, like what are the, the page views or the downloads or what have you, and then driving the conversation from there to get more precise and more useful.
Awesome. All right, what do we got next here? How should one think about content modeling when content is entirely managed internally versus created by end users? When content is static versus dynamic? Should I read it again?
Read it again.
I'll read it again. How should one think about content modeling when content is entirely managed internally versus created by end users? When content is static versus dynamic?
And did you say created by end users?
Yes.
Yeah, user-generated content is its own problem. And
Opportunity.
that's putting it mildly. User-generated content presents many challenges.
Yeah.
And I think if we're thinking about content models, the only thing I can think of with user-generated content, there's probably other things, but providing the structure to the people who are creating, the users that are creating that content, is one thing that you can try. In my experience, user-generated content, it really doesn't matter how many forms you create or how many instructions you provide. People are going to write what they want to write, where they want to write it. And you're kind of just going to have to deal with it as its own animal.
A learning opportunity for me on the fly here is, does user-generated content, is it its own data set? It lives in a different place than the content that's being produced internally?
Oh, yeah.
And is it managed the same way, or does it have different rule sets?
I had a customer once that, for some reason, decided they were going to let their users provide updates and changes to their technical manuals. It didn't go over so well. Did not work too well. No.
It's like the world's scariest intranet. I think that, the user-generated content versus internally generated content is a really interesting juxtaposition. I am a firm believer that, ultimately, like you said, people are going to create what they want to create, and that's important. And if we're smart as organizations, we're going to pay attention to that, listen to that, and learn from that, and maybe adapt our own structures accordingly. Because ultimately, why else are we here? I know that there's a lot of sort of product folks, I think, here. I obviously have a very different kind of frame for the work I do, but the user-generated content that I tend to work with, if somebody is going to get somebody to a town hall meeting by showing up at the library and handing out flyers, then you have to give them the template for the flyer. And you can't force them to, no, you're going to have to upload this to a website and send them the URL. Well, my neighbors don't have access to the internet. So you have to, like in my world, you really have to listen to the user and to the end, to the folks on the ground and learn from them and shape how you do things around that to some degree. And I think it's really important. And I think that there's, even in the, commercial space, I think that there's a lot of value to that.
We saw that example in the cake
Yeah.
right, earlier. So it started internally, right? But then all of a sudden, we were doing more cake stuff, and then all of a sudden there was cake builders. I mean, that's user. What is not a cake that you build, but user-generated content in that way? Usually, wonderful, yummy user-generated content that they will consume later. But that's what it is. We began with internal structure, and we saw how it evolved, and eventually it evolved into an opportunity for user input and in a different modeling.
And finding ways to take advantage of interoperability and pulling in from different sources, that flexibility becomes really important as well for that.
I think we've got 10 minutes left. Maybe we'll do some, did you want to expand on that?
One more thing, in each of these, in all of these answers, I'm hearing that it's driven by the people who are creating the content and how it'll be used. So the way I heard that question to begin with was, how might you approach it differently, or what would be different about it? And my first response was, we wouldn't approach it differently at all. We just model it the way I would model everything else and take the various inputs that we always take into account. And that's kind of what I've heard. And one of the inputs are the people who will be using it. So the user-generated input, if you can, maybe don't give them a free text field. Because if you have validated fields, as again we saw with the cake example, you can get a rating, you can get a location, you can get a list of ingredients by providing a controlled vocabulary that's then much easier to control. And I won't say that it would never go sideways, because nothing of that surprising, but
read-only fields too.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So I don't think the process is different, but I think there's inherent complexity in the process that sometimes gets elided when we only look at one case or when we look at the ideal cases, as we also saw with the cake example.
Cool. I think we have, 8 minutes. So I was thinking we'd do a little rapid fire to see if we can bang these all out. A little more of a tactical question. How do I include translation in my content strategy? Rapid fire. Who's got this one?
That's a huge question.
Translation has to be considered from the very beginning. It absolutely cannot be an afterthought. And you have to consider translation when you're building your models. You have to consider translation when you're developing your taxonomy and your metadata. You have to make decisions and have a strategy in advance. You also have to select tools that are going to allow you to integrate your content management system with your translation management system. There's so many things to think about when you're creating global content. You have to think about your translation memories and the beginning of terminology and how that's going to work.
Sure.
If you treat it as an afterthought, you will run into tremendous trouble. I work with customers every day with global content strategy, and it has to be included. There's just...
Seems to come up a lot in our discovery calls with a lot of the prospects we're speaking to as well.
I don't think there's a complete parallel, but likewise accessibility. If you treat it as an afterthought, you're going to run into problems.
Yes.
Why should UX designers care about structured content?
If they want content to not mess up their designs.
All the hard work they're pouring in?
Yeah, exactly. The design will look much, much better. The experience will be much, much better if the content is working hand in hand and structured content. I love the concepts that we've heard a number of times over the course of the conference of atomic content really married nicely with design, systems and libraries. That's, I think, what we really need to work toward.
I like this one, this practical use case from maybe a publishing use case for a magazine. How would you, or how to interperse evergreen content with fresh, related content?
The related question again.
Read it one more time.
Read it again? Okay.
Yeah.
For a magazine,
For a magazine.
how would you interperse evergreen content with fresh, related content?
I think it goes back to atomic, because that's the cool part. If you're doing atomic content,
Yeah.
and you can inject that in an evergreen, all of a sudden that evergreen is fresh again. You have to. That's how you spruce it up. So you spray a little water on the
Absolutely.
growing tree.
Yeah.
Since humans design the content model, how do you overcome inherent bias and structural racism in that model?
Ooh.
Took a turn.
Yeah. What's that?
Took a little bit of a turn, but
Yeah. I think it's the audience that you include. Because we're always talking to the subject matter experts, and it's including audiences that can help us spot the things that, even as very well-intentioned designers, but as a white male working in technology,
Yeah.
I'm blind to. So it's the onus is on me to seek out those audiences and make sure that that everyone is fully visible in a way that I can't see all on my own.
What's that exercise? Just a lot of stakeholder interviews, just acquiring as much data as possible.
Yeah, and it's
Wide net as possible.
The right stakeholder and the right subject matter experts. It's thinking about stakeholders. Well, leadership, you may not have much of a choice because you have the leadership that you have.
Yeah.
But with subject matter experts, if you're going to talk to 5 or 6 people, just making sure that you have a well-represented pool of people, not only for the stated business goals and your metrics, but also for inclusion and making sure that we're not perpetuating biases.
Well, I think you kind of nailed it. Like, hire Black, Indigenous people of color and put them in leadership roles. That's how you combat structural racism, period. Like, representation. It has to happen.
And I'd throw
That's it.
accessibility in there too,
Yeah.
along with that. And is my content accessible? Is it accessible in all different ways? And how am I structuring it? Am I structuring it more accessible or less?
And are we testing it with those groups?
Who should be in a content model kickoff meeting at a 30-person company and at a 3,000-person company?
The answer is not everyone.
Are there similar stakeholders at those meetings you find? Or it just depends on the culture or environment of a company?
I think in a 30-person perspective, it's, I want to make sure that the content strategist is there, an engineer is there, a UX bridge person's there for the real UX, and I think starting with that, product manager that's making sure that all of this makes sense in what we're actually building. And that's, I think, a pretty good foundation to get started.
In some companies, that might be one person.
Yeah. Yeah, I think cross-functional, cross-disciplinary is
Yeah.
sort of the key there, in both sides, in whatever the size. And I think, too, a lot of it is really kind of needs to be informed by the purpose of the kickoff meeting. I mean, is this, and I think
Very much so.
the way you shape your kickoff meeting might look different in different settings. If you already have leadership buy-in, your kickoff meeting might look different than if you don't. So.
Well, you hopefully aren't looking to create buy-in still at a kickoff meeting.
Well, I mean, I think, again, it goes back to shared language.
Yeah,
Are we kicking off, I've been in kickoff meetings where
Yeah.
everyone thought we had leadership buy-in, but guess what? 6 weeks, 6 months into the project, and all of a sudden you get the executive poop and swoop, and it's like, wait, I thought they were on board.
I think we got 30 seconds for this last question. I think it's a good one to end on. Is there any domain that cannot be modeled and structured?
No.
No.
I love it. We followed the rules. No one said it depends. Thanks to our panel. All right.
Those were great questions.
Those are great questions.
Thank you to you all for such great questions.
Yeah.
Awesome. That was great. I just wanted to say it depends now, but right. We're at the end of the first ever Strategic Content conference. And yeah, this has been 2 amazing days. Quite dense in terms of like all the thoughts and ideas and discussions and so on, but hopefully we can kind of like think about this going into the rest of the 2022. We can watch the reruns on YouTube or read a blog post that will surely come out of this. Yeah, I look forward to all of that. To kind of like put the cherry on the top, call back. We have Magnus with us, who's going to kind of like sum it up, no less. It's a pretty daunting task, considering how much has been said. But yeah, welcome Magnus to the stage.
Thank you, Knut. Concluding remarks, aka the person who stands between you and a beer, your kids, or your flight back home, or maybe a bunch of emails. We did it. Yeah, a round of applause. We've learned that the mission of content is to create remarkable experiences for people. We've learned that content is the experience, and the experience is the brand. This isn't about technology. It's about human connection. Content is what stays with you when the experience fades away. We've learned that structured content matters. We have the technology, and we've learned the meaning. See if I remember it again, Carrie. Structured content is content, there you are, that is broken down to its smallest reasonable pieces, explicitly organized to be readable by computers and humans. We've also learned that even a little structure makes a difference. Even a little data makes a difference. And if you have a lot of structure, you'd receive 753% revenue growth. We also learned that you can't have too much content, and I would say 753% growth, that would be too much for most companies, so that jives. This is the beginning of something. There is change happening. We wanted to create a conference about content, and we did it. We wanted to start a meeting place, and you did it. We think this is the start of something big. And I've learned today from my friend Sippy, if you think it, it's true. Our vision is to continue this work and build a community around what we have started at the intersection of content strategy and content philosophy and content technology. We believe that community is needed, and we're committed to continue this work. Now go home and spread the word. Keep in touch with each other. And stay tuned for more. Final, I want to thank every speaker who spent the time preparing and having all these amazing, I actually started commenting on each talk, but Peter said, like, Magnus, you can't do that. It'll take you an hour, but it was amazing. So thank you to all the speakers. Round of applause to the speakers. And a round of applause to our sponsors. I'm not going to go by them by name because we've done it a lot of times. And last but not least, to the Sanity team arranging this conference, to our event organizers, to the technical team, to the team at Terra, and to Knut, our MC. Thank you so much for making this happen.